cylinder makes sense to me. You can see by default the cylinder isn't very tall. Let's make it taller, maybe not that tall. Drag it up and down. Yeah, this is kind of a good height. Maybe a little bit skinnier. It's probably taller than it needs to be. And this is sort of as practice. Let's give it a new material. Assets, create material. What color instead of white? Tree trunk looking brown. I accidentally forgot to name it, so it says new material. Again, I'm going to use Enter on a Mac, F2 on Windows to rename that to tree trunk color. I'm going to drag that onto the tree trunk. And then we need a top of the tree. For that, I'm going to, let's rename this cylinder to trunk. Game object, create other sphere. Tree top. And let's make that grass colored because it's close enough to a tree. And it's kind of a little extreme. There we go. We got a nice little tree going right there. Now, we could make trunk a child of treetop or treetop a child of trunk to stay organized. What I recommend instead is to create a completely new game object, create empty. Call this full tree. And we're going to make both the treetop and the trunk child of full tree. The reason for this is this allows us to keep the scale of the parent 1, 1, 1. If you make either one of these scaled objects a child of the other, scale can get messy when you start to do rotations of children and so on. So I prefer to create an empty and use that kind of as a folder like we showed earlier. So we have a tree now, and sure enough, we can crash into it just like we always did. Bump. But let's make it so when you crash into the tree, it respawns the car. And so the first thing we're going to need to do for that is create a new C# script. Create C# script. Assets, create C# script. We're going to name that reset from crash. And then inside this script, reset from crash, we're not going to write any code for starter update. Instead, we are going to write code for a function called onCollisionEnter, which has one argument, collision, the collision. And this is code that gets called whenever a rigid body collision occurs. Car driver, other objects script equals the collision dot game object dot get component car driver parentheses semicolon. I realize this looks kind of alien. We'll walk through in a second how this works and what it's doing. And then if other object script does not equal to null, we're going to call other object script dot respawn. And now let's go back to car driver, which is the script we're pointing to. We're going to create a public function called respawn, in which, so here we have code already for how to respawn and update for when you go below the earth. Let's just change that to a call to this function, and we're going to move that code. I copy and pasted it from down there up to respawn. So now if we fall off the edge of the earth, it will respawn the car, meaning it will execute this code for the car. But also if we crash into the tree, because this function is public, we can call it on the other object that collided with us. And this is a really powerful way in Unity, or a powerful thing to be able to do in Unity, to get a script on the other object. So this is checking, does the other object that I have this collision with as the tree, does it have the car driver script attached? And if it does, or call the respawn function on that object. Now we're not quite out clear, unfortunately, because if we try this now, well, so first of all, we haven't attached it yet. So let's go to our full tree. Let's attach reset from crash. But again, we're not going to have any results yet, and this can be frustrating for Unity of why doesn't it respawn me yet? And the reason is the tree has to be a rigid body. Like I said, onCollisionEnter is an event thrown when rigid bodies collide, but the tree is not. So let's go to component physics, rigid body. And so now we can collide with the tree, and the car should respawn. And it does. I will say, though, that, oh, our tree fell over. That's a problem. The way we need to avoid that is to tell it that this tree is kinematic. We're going to check mark it. That's actually the same, I believe, as setting constraints, as turning on all 6 of these boxes to freeze position and rotation. And this just tells it, don't let physics code move this object. We just want to use this to detect collisions and things like that. And so now we collide with a tree, it respawns us in the same way that let's verify that driving off the edge still works too, and it does. Next up, we're going to cover briefly the prefab system, which is a powerful way in Unity to create sort of an exemplar object and the modifications of it. So let's go to Asset, Create Prefab. Over here, we're going to name the prefab. I'm going to name it TreeFab because I think that's outstanding. Now we're going to drag full tree, the parent object, onto TreeFab. And now here's the magic. We can drag TreeFab onto the ground all over the place. Let's throw some trees around. And each one of these is already hooked up the same way as our first tree, with a rigid body and with the scripts attached and so on, so that when the car drives around and collides with them, it gets respawned in the middle. And even more interesting, so you can see they each have their own position, so the position data here is in bold. You can make changes to these, so I can make the scale of the treetop on this one, let's make it bigger. And then let's make this tree's trunk taller and thicker. 2, 2, 5, let's make this a huge tree. Treetop. 10, 10, 10. Yeah, so massive tree over here. And they'll all still act the same. You can see there's our huge tree. It respawns us, just like our lower, bigger top tree is. And we can take those changes, which you can see are again are highlighted in bold, and we can either be like, you know what, I didn't mean to make this tree so big. I want it to be exactly the way my default prefab is. If we click on Revert, it will take it back to the properties of our common prefab object here under Project. Or if we've made changes to one, like let's say I had turrets, and this actually happened in Freezing Solid recently. I had turrets and I made one of them play a little bit better by adjusting its tuning parameters, and I wanted all the turrets like that. So let's say that we decided this tree works better with what we're going for. We'll click on that one tree, and here under prefab options, instead of revert, if we click apply, it'll make all the prefabs catch up to the settings that were bold, except position, and we'll take on those connections and qualities. Our sky is gray, which is kind of unfortunate, or I guess it's kind of a bluish. But we want to have control over the sky, and so let's create a new material, and we'll name that sky color. Change the color from white here to whatever shade of blue you like. There we go. There's a blue for the sky. Let's go to Edit. Render settings is where we can set the skybox. This is also where we could set up fog if we wanted it. And we're going to drag sky color onto skybox material. You can see there it instantly filled in, and now we have a color of our sky. You could use cube maps and other fancy things for this. We're not going to worry about that here. It's just give you some control over making it look a little less like the template. And again, fog, if you want to check it on and things and play with those values, you are more than welcome. Let's also add text. This is a very useful basic skill. Game object, create other GUI text. And it's going to, by default, appear in the middle of the screen. Let's set its position to 0, which is the left side, 1, which is the top, 0. And the reason why those are the edges is because the anchor is set to the upper left. We could change this to make it appear in another corner if we so pleased. Now let's set the text for it. I'm going to say car sample in Unity. What is it? I think Alt-Enter by Christelion. And Alt-Enter is the way that I go to a next line. It may be different in Windows, but there's probably some key combination with Enter to get a new line instead of completing the text box. And so now when we play the game, those words appear there, and so it's a good way to credit your work in case it gets lifted and shows up elsewhere on the internet, or to provide instructions or whatever your needs might be. And just like any of the other objects, you can connect this up to code to read out positional data and so on. So if we want to go to the car driver script, let's say we want public GUI text debug output. And we're going to hook up our text object to this. Inside update, let's say that we're really concerned with knowing the car's X position for whatever reason. Then we're just going to set the debug output. Actually, let's make that a string. Empty string plus whatever, we'll make a string out of it trivially. So we're going to set the text property of our GUI text to the X position of the car. And then don't forget under car_all that we have to hook up debug output to our GUI text object. So from the hierarchy, there it is to our debug output. That's with car_all selected in the inspector. And now as I drive around, we can see that value. And so this, of course, is a handy way to provide arbitrarily complex or even spatially relevant data as you're working on debugging features of your game by showing text on the screen. One last thing that we also need to account for is we need to find code that we know will always be running. In our case, car driver seems pretty safe. But something to be careful of, right, is if the car got removed from the universe, say it exploded, this code will no longer run. We need to put what I'm about to show you in code that will always be running, which for this program we know is here. Let's do input.getKey keycode.escape. So if the user presses the escape key, then we're going to do application.quit. This will not show up in a web version. This will not work inside the Unity editor, but this is absolutely essential if you are doing a local Windows or Macintosh build, so that someone can quit your game without having to control it, delete, or force quit it. It's a little insane to me that this isn't built into the program, but developer be warned, add this to your program. It will save you trouble and save your user frustration. So again, escape key will do nothing here, but when we export the program now, we can use escape to quit, which will be very handy. That's it for now, except for making a build. So let's go to File, Build Settings, and this is, of course, where Unity shines. Here we can tell it we want a Mac OS X build, and click Build, and it'll let us choose where we want to put it. I like to create a folder called Deploy inside my project and save all my outputs there. Car Mac. Get it? It'll take it a second to output the project information. And it'll show us the version, and I can now run that. It by default lets me choose my properties. Play it windowed. It's going to be my full screen. And there's my game. I can drive around, I can reorient the car, go off the edge of the earth. Everything still works. My trees, of course, I updated the prefab like we showed. I'm still getting the debug text output. And if I press escape, it'll close that since we added that important code. You can also output the PC, the Windows build, even on Mac. Again, I like to put it in my deploy folder. Car PC, that one's less of a pun on a famous game designer's name. Take it a moment. And then the other thing we can do is we can output for web player. All of these, of course, are free. With Unity, you have to pay for the other output options. Don't worry about those for now. Deploy, car web. And when you output for web, it'll give you an HTML file with the file already embedded. Car Unity, car HTML. And so this is actually all that I had to do to output the sample build that I showed at the start of this walkthrough, was just outputting the build this way and posting that HTML file to the web. And again, everything works. Escape key is ignored harmlessly. And I hope you've had a good time following this tutorial. I know it's not beautiful, but hopefully it's enough to get some people started in exploring Unity and all the great things you can do with it. If you've got questions, please let me know. I'd be happy to answer them. I might do a follow-up video showing sound, some various other kind of hookups, camera techniques, if folks are interested. If you want the full source code, check it out. It's going to be on a blog entry at hobbygamedev.com. Thanks again, and have a good time with it. Bye-bye.